All right, so let's pick up on Jackson's first term as president. Um, Jackson was admired because he was the very first president who had not been from an elite family. He had accumulated some amount of wealth, and he did own some land, and he was a slave owner. But he was not from a wealthy background. He didn't have a pedigree, so to speak. People flocked to Washington, D.C. for his inauguration and actually trashed the White House, and we're going to watch some video about that in class. And he opened it up. He invited people in, and people took him at his word, and so people showed up in droves for this thing. Jackson promised equal protection and equal benefits for all Americans, and this meant that there were going to be expanded voting rights. So let's back up. So, as you know, at first, only white men above the age of 21 who owned land or paid taxes could vote. And you really only paid taxes if you owned land, so those two went hand in hand. By the 1820s, a lot of states had loosened those requirements so that all you had to do was be adult, white, and male. And this is how Jackson got elected. He took advantage of that and campaigned directly to those people who were dock workers, who were factory workers, who were small farmers. And so that's how he won their votes. And he went directly into the factories and campaigned right there. He took great advantage of this. So, and he disliked things called interest groups. Today, these things are called special interest groups. Please understand that these things still exist. And these are groups that try to influence how government works and in the ways that they make their decisions. And these are not necessarily bad things, but a lot of people say they have too much sway in government, all right? And Jackson felt like back in those days, especially, they had way too much power in the government. Today, these groups would be people like the gun lobby, the environmentalist protection people, people for equal treatment of animals, PETA, all you name it. People who want to take sugary drinks off the market. I mean, all kinds of people who are trying to sway the way we make our laws. That's what you call special interest groups. And Jackson also has an innate dislike for people who come from wealth and power, so he automatically distrusts and dislikes, oddly enough, most of the people who are working in Washington, D.C., most of those people who are politicians. He also has a dislike and distrust of them. And, of course, there's Clay and Adams, who would maneuver behind closed doors, and that's his experience with people like that. And he's like, no, this is not good. They feel that government, Jackson and the Democrats feel that government has become too much of a bureaucracy. So what is a bureaucracy? Again, I have a picture down here at the bottom. Obviously, there are no photographs back then, and even if there were, this would not be a photograph of the way things were back then. Okay, these obviously are people dressed in more modern times, not 2017, but modern times. But a bureaucracy is when government becomes more run by a system of appointed people, desk jockey officials, we call them, than your elected officials. And so what you have then is a government that is run by people who are not elected. For instance, a good example of this would be, and please don't, I'm not taking sides here, I'm just using this as an example, our Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. When it was started back in the 1970s, great concept, but it has grown and grown and grown and grown, and now it can practically write law. If it comes up with a rule or a policy, those rules and policies do not have to be signed off on by Congress. It can just decide whatever it wants to decide about how you use your water or your land, and that's the rule. And so this was the kind of thing that Jackson and the Democrats, it wasn't going on to this kind of extent back in those days, but there were some things going on that they didn't like about this. All right, so when he gets elected, he fires a lot of these federal workers and replaces them with his own supporters. Please understand, all presidents do this. In fact, I am making this screencast just right before President Trump comes into office, and there's a big hue and cry about how he's going to be firing some people and hiring new people. All presidents do this. President Obama did this when he came into office. President Bush before him, President Clinton before him, they all do this. They fire a lot of people that are already there, some of these bureaucrats, and put their own supporters in. Now, why would they do such a thing? Well, because the people who are there before them obviously support the previous president's point of view. And so if they leave those people there, are they going to carry out the policies of the new guy? Probably not at least to the best of their ability. They're going to be dragging their feet on some of this stuff. And so when new presidents come into office, they usually fire a lot of these federal workers and replace them with their own supporters. Again, please understand, they all do this. And probably people before Jackson did this too, but he was pretty obvious with it. He didn't even try to hide it or sugarcoat it. And the fired people protested. And so Jackson, being who he is, he doesn't try to smooth things over or make things nice. And he says, sorry, to the victors belong the spoils. And thus, something called the spoils system was born. Now, you guys need to know that he calls this the spoils system. And that's the idea that if you win the election, you get to appoint the people you want. Again, this is not something that's unusual or uncommon, but back in those days, it is something that is, Jackson is tagged with this as being sort of scandalous. And maybe he was. Maybe he did it to a greater extent than some of the other presidents before him. But they all do that. They all did it before him, and they've all done it ever since him. So please understand it's common and logical when you think about it. All right, Jackson's supporters also get rid of something called the caucus system in most all of the states and replace it with nominating conventions, which is what we see today in most all of our states as far as choosing our presidential candidate with the nominating system. This is not anything you're going to be tested on, but it is one more thing where some of the people in the country felt like Jackson was being a little heavy-handed maybe. Again, backing up about who Jackson is, he's been a military commander for most of his life. Used to being able to saying, I want this done, and it gets done. So he's probably a little bit forceful with what he wants done. But this nominating convention system is what's been in place for almost all the states ever since then, except in Iowa, and also a couple other states, and I think Kentucky this last time has gone to a caucus system, has gone back to the caucus system. Okay, let's talk about tariffs, because tariffs become important, and as you know, those are taxes on imports. And, this has been a debate since forever and ever, back to Washington, before Washington. All right, there was a tariff that is passed called a protective tariff in 1828. Now, that's just as the election is happening. And the people in the Northeast, where most of the factories are and most of the trade is taking place, they welcome this thing. But the people in the South don't like it so much, obviously. All right. I want to take a minute, and I hope this doesn't go too long, but I need to explain to you how the South was trading for things. So if you are a farmer in the South, but maybe even a plantation owner at this time, because by now we're getting a few plantations across the South, not spread like you think of them as being lots and lots of them, but there are a few. So if I'm a plantation owner, say in Virginia or South Carolina, I would put my cargo on a boat, tobacco, cotton. I would ship it to England, and sometimes I don't get paid completely in dollars or pounds. Sometimes in return, I get paid in goods. The people are taking my cotton or my tobacco, and they're sending something to me back in trade. They're sending me furniture, or they're sending me cloth, especially if I'm sending cotton. Sending cotton over there, and they're sending me the equivalent money, or I'm getting paid some in money, and I'm getting paid some in cloth. Now, the tariff is a problem, because if I'm not getting paid money, and my payment comes back to me in goods, what do I have to do? I have to pay a tax on that when it comes back. So especially the South hates this thing. All right, let's see. Vice President Calhoun, Jackson's vice president, believes in the idea of nullification. And it goes all the way back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions written by Jefferson and Madison. And that is the idea that if the state believes that the national government has made a law that they think is unconstitutional, the state should be allowed to nullify or not obey that law. All right. Remember, I told you those Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are going to become important. It's only 1828. They're already going back and looking at those. It's going to become increasingly important as we run up to the Civil War. All right. Jackson doesn't see things this way. He believes in the ultimate authority of the central government. Now, he believes in states' rights to a certain extent, but let's see. He's like, well, no, if we pass a law in Washington, D.C., you need to obey the law. Jackson and Calhoun are not going to get along at all well on this. All right. The two of them are at some dinner party at some point, and they trade verbal jabs at this thing, and Calhoun should be careful. In 1832, Congress does pass a lower tariff, but it's not enough to make South Carolina happy. South Carolina passes a nullification act saying that it's not going to pay the illegal tariffs, and I think they should be careful who they're messing with. It's Andrew Jackson. He's not your average, ordinary, diplomatic, run-of-the-mill politician. Furthermore, South Carolina threatens to secede from the Union if the government interferes. Again, better be careful. Jackson didn't want this to happen, though, so he backs a bill, gradually lowers the tariff down. He also threatens to hang some of the South Carolina legislature if they don't straighten up. And again, he's probably going to be backed by this. And Jackson asked for and receives from Congress permission to use force on South Carolina if necessary. So he is going to back up his words with action. Now, a couple things happened during this time period to bring the whole thing to a close. First, in 1832, Jackson is overwhelmingly reelected by the rest of the country, which sends South Carolina a message. We believe that what Andrew Jackson is doing is right and that you're wrong, and we're not going to back you if you decide. If you decide on the secession thing, you're on your own. And whatever he does to you, fine with us. Second, early in 1833, after his inauguration, Congress passes a lower tariff bill and also a force bill, which will allow Jackson to do whatever he wants with South Carolina if they continue on this pathway. Again, you're not going to win an argument with this guy. He's used to being a general.